Episode 2 of The Rings of Power, less boring than Episode 1, but still far from Tolkien's writing, and sadly for us, still far from a good show. But let's dive into what we see in this episode. The episode kicks off with Mount Doom erupting, which causes an earthquake in Casa Doom, which looks pretty cool from the outside. As always, the writers try way too hard with the dialogue, and it becomes clunky and distracting from what the characters tries to say. This is sadly a point that comes up again and again. Anyway, the earthquake causes Casa Doom to fall into darkness, as the mirrors are no longer functioning. This in turn leads to crops dying and the population starving. I don't really mind that, though it's pure fanfiction. What I mind is the logic seeming to be missing. They are dwarves, and they have access to gold, silver, mithril jewels, great machinery, high quality forged weapons. They got plenty of resources, but apparently nobody wants to trade with them. It seems so obvious they could just buy food with all these things, which in my mind is likely what they did in the lore. In The Hobbit we even hear how close they are with the men of Dale, and how some men became apprentices of dwarven smiths. So yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We are also introduced to Narvi, which is a minor character from the lore. He is a close friend with Celebrimbor, and along with him they create the West Gate of Moria. Lore-wise, I'd place the construction of the gate way earlier in the Second Age, near the founding of Egan, which means he wouldn't be alive while the Seven were forged. So in my mind, he shouldn't actually be alive. But then again, the West Gate haven't been made yet, so I guess that's why. On top of that, he doesn't seem to have a friendship with Celebrimbor either. Maybe that will come in a later season, maybe not. He doesn't strike me as a craftsman though. We also see Disa and two other dwarf women sing to the mountain or stone or whatever. This is pure fanfiction and never mentioned in Tolkien's lore. I've even heard some say they took this element from some other fantasy series that was cancelled. We also get to see Peter Mullen as King Durin again. Like I said last season, I think he's the best actor by far, and his delivery seems less forced and rushed, as with many of the other actors. He did get some clunky piece of dialogue though. Instead of saying hold your tongue, it's still your axe. It's just over the top confusing and totally unnecessary. Next we see some very long and rather boring scenes with Durin and Disa having trouble because of a dispute between the king and Prince Durin. I honestly couldn't care less. The episode ends with Prince Durin receiving a message from Celebrimbor inviting him to Egan. Let's jump to the next storyline, Galadriel. We see her in front of her brother's statue somewhere in Lindon, and then Celebrimbor shows up, talking about Halbrand or Sauron returning to Egan. It becomes clear it's a nightmare, where Celebrimbor tells us the famous ring verse, but in black speech. Next we see Gil-galad with his commanders planning an attack on Mordor. And boy oh boy, these people... my goodness. It's really dumb. That's all I can say. Once again, we have some cringe and over-the-top dialogue. I'm really doing my best not to laugh at this fanfiction. It's incredibly how low inaccurate they can manage to be. Apparently Sauron needs Celebrimbor now to create the remaining rings. At least the map in the background looks cool. For that 1 second it appears. I'm not sure why they think two rivers will defend the realm, especially because we've seen the location a million times, yet the rivers have never been mentioned as an obstacle or hindrance in any way. Galadriel reveals to Gil-galad that she has had strange visions from the unseen world apparently. I'd just like to clarify dreams, visions and the unseen world are all three different things. I think Tom Shippey has an interesting point in his book The Road to Middle-earth, where he talks about the danger of trusting visions. It is often when people trust visions to be true, things go wrong. Just like Denethor is certain Sauron has the One Ring after seeing Frodo captured in the Tower of Cirith Ungol. So yeah, I think the real Gil-galad or Galadriel would have been more cautious to trust any visions. Anyway, Galadriel wants to confront Sauron in Eregion if he is indeed there, but Gil-galad doesn't trust her to go alone. Meanwhile in Eregion, Midanya is sent down to Halbrand to send him off, but he refuses to leave and instead spends most of the episode just standing still. Then we have a scene where Galadriel tries to convince Elrond to travel with her to Eregion, but he doesn't really want to play into Sauron's scheme. That likely include them traveling to Eregion. It becomes clear Galadriel is afraid of Sauron corrupting her, and we get some more whining. Of course. What else can you do? Then we have Círdan shaving his beard, which is kind of sad, as he is pretty much the only known elf with a beard. There's of course Matan in the lore, but not during the Second Age. Right after he proceeds to slander Rúmil as a drunkard, and Daeron being awful. It's clearly a shot at the lore, but it feels weird and any true lore expert can only shake their head. Then Elrond and him have a little pep talk about how important it is the elves use the rings, as they will use them for good and not evil. In Eregion we see Celebrimbor creating Ithildin, or moon runes, which is pretty cool, and from the lore at least. Celebrimbor isn't exactly credited as the creator in the lore, but I don't mind it. He then looks down at sad Halbrand standing in the rain. First he dismisses him, but then Halbrand convinces him that Gil-galad and Galadriel are using the rings and not caring about him. In reality, the messengers have been killed, either by Sauron himself or some of his servants we don't get to see. I'm not sure how he managed to track them down, or why nobody sends new messengers, given the importance of these messages. But whatever. Next I have a heartfelt conversation with more tears, and Halbrand wants to know if Celebrimbor is his friend. He then reveals he is not Halbrand, not a man from the Southlands, not even a mortal. Celebrimbor doubts he is sent by the Valar, and then Halbrand appears before him in a new form, and gives himself the name Anatar. At least it looks pretty cool, but what can you do? And the last thing in this storyline is Galadriel being sent to Eregion, but under Elrond's command, and not the other way around. Something Girlboss clearly doesn't like. Wait, is that a sipper? The last storyline is with wannabe Gandalf in the east. We are introduced to a new location called Karasgeia. Like everything else, it's made up, and so is the Dark Wizard, who might be Saruman. But who knows, and who really cares at this point? He is the leader of what appears to be a dark cult of witches, and the weird witch bitch from season 1 somehow returns. I got no idea why moths are part of this. Maybe it's a coincidence, but in Jackson's films, they are always associated with the eagles. As this Easterling speaks, he not only looks like he's from Star Wars, but he also sounds like it. The references sadly don't end there. I'm sure it's a coincidence, but a truly unfortunate one. Wandering in the east is wannabe Gandalf and wannabe Frodo and wannabe Sam. They're trying to give him a name, and they say he needs his Gand. Yeah. Who can guess what he will be called? It's such a mystery, right? Anyway, the Easterling with his gang of Tusken raiders are hunting them. They're almost caught, but hobbits are excellent at hiding, which is at least lore accurate. But that's about it. Then they continue through the desert and almost die of thirst, it seems. But then very luckily they find a well in the middle of nowhere, and they're all super happy and whining again. What a surprise. Then the Tusken raiders show up, and wannabe Gandalf finds a random staff on the ground and creates a sandstorm. The staff is destroyed, and the horrible half-orcs fly into the unknown and won't return in the next episode. Now, that's the kind of magic I like. Make them disappear entirely, and I'll applaud the fake wizard. Anyway, that's what happens in episode 2, so let's move on to the points. Story. If there's one thing the series is good at, it's being boring. It never fails on that front. I've hated the half-orc storyline since the very start of season 1, and it somehow gets worse and worse. Now possibly with wannabe Saruman, and later wannabe Tom Bombadil. The Casa Doom storyline doesn't make a lot of sense to me, and it feels like the dwarves are just whining in their own way. Just like everybody else in this show, apparently. The storyline with Halbrand and Celebrimbor is without doubt the only good part in this episode, and it actually manages to implement some lore elements that at least borders something Tolkien actually wrote. In the lore, Anatar actually introduces himself as a messenger sent by the Valar. He even says he's an apprentice of Aule, which he once were, and which of course is also why he's such a skilled craftsman. All of this leads to a 5 out of 10 points. Lore. When it comes to the lore, this show is as far removed from Tolkien's works as anything. You might even get more lore watching the Transformers, but at least this episode had some elements from the actual lore. I gave the first episode a 0, so any points here is a win. I'll give 1 point for the scenes with Halbrand turning into Anatar, 1 point with the staff and rune, which at least can remind of the dark magic cults the Blue Wizards might have started, as Tolkien mentions in one of his letters. Lastly, I'll give half a point for mentioning Rúmil, Daeron, Ithildin, the Unseen World, and the Hobbits actually being good at hiding. So 2.5 out of 10 for this episode, which is very generous, I'd say. Visuals. It's a boring but at least stunning series. There are certain costumes I really hate though. The Easterlings, of course. The staff of the evil wizard looks like a prop for a cosplayer, and I don't think the wig for Anatar works either. It just looks off to me. I really like the outdoor look for Khazad-dûm, the map in the background for a second, and Eregion to some extent. This makes us end on a 3.5 out of 10. Dialogue. The dialogue in this show is in general some of the worst I've ever witnessed. It's not as bad as season 1, yet at least, but it often feels forced, clunky, distracting, and at times outright dumb. There's sadly no good dialogue I noticed, which is something I really like from Jackson films at least. For this reason I land on a 1.5 out of 10. Acting. I think Peter Mullen does an excellent job as King Durin, but his performance is mixed with that of Na'vi, Prince Durin and Disa, which doesn't do much for me. I'm not saying they're bad actors, but I don't find them compelling in any way, and the clunky dialogue is certainly one of the reasons for that. I got nothing good to say about the Half-Wits or Pretender Gandalf. I think the evil wizard is the best part of the storyline, but I also really like Kieran Hintz from Game of Thrones and River Rome series, so he gets a point alone. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, by the way. I think the dynamic between Celebrimbor and Halbrand worked well in this episode, and for once the dialogue was less clunky and distracting. Without doubt the best part of this entire episode. For all of this, we land on a 6 out of 10. I don't think it's the actors' fault the show isn't better, and I'm sure they could do a better job if the scripts were better. Music and sound. I honestly don't recall the music very well, which means it wasn't extremely bad, but nor very impressive. The Darth Vader kind of sound for the Easterling was the most distracting, and Disa's singing in Khazad-dûm was at least not dreadful. It sounded a bit weird and coastal, as all I heard was May, but maybe that's just me. I'll be generous and give the episode 4.5 out of 10. Final score. If you can endure endless whining, boredom, annoying and pointless side plots, well then you might enjoy this episode. It was certainly better than the first one, and at least tried to implement some of the lore. It was still far from accurate, of course, but at least way closer than anything we've seen so far. For this reason, I end on a 4 out of 10, but I'm way more interested to hear your opinion. What would you give it? What did you like and what did you hate? Leave a comment below. As always, special thanks to all the patrons and members of the channel. Your support keeps this channel alive, so thank you very much. Feel free to check out one of these videos next. Farewell till next time.